This is GE 6100, Understanding the Self. Today's topic is the self from the various perspective or from various philosophers. Now for the learning outcomes. Number one, know the meaning of philosophy, identify the different philosophers and their contributions, discuss and explain the answer to the famous question, who am I? Now, for the definition of philosophy, it comes from the two Greek words philos, which means love, and Sophia, which means wisdom. So, in essence, it can be translated to love of knowledge, of passion for learning. It is also defined as the investigation of normal and fundamental issues concerning matters, for example, presence, information, values, reason, psyche, and dialect. For the philosophers and their contributions, Saint Augustine is a 4th century scholar whose notable theory implanted Christian teaching with Neoplatonism. He is well known for being a much less Catholic scholar and for his free thinker commitment to Western logic. He contends that doubters have no reason for asserting to realize that there is no learning. Last time we talked about St. Augustine being a believer of love and justice as the foundation of the individual self. That St. Augustine believes that a virtuous life is a dynamism of love. It is a constant following of and turning towards love, while a wicked life is a constant turning away from love. That according to St. Augustine, loving God means loving one's fellow man. And loving one's fellow man denotes never doing any harm to another. Or as the golden principle of justice states, doing unto others as you would have them do unto you. Summarizing St. Augustine's philosophical standpoint, St. Augustine's orientation is Platonism. His philosophy, Neoplatonism, which he described as all knowledge leads to God. St. Augustine says that only the pure in heart can see God, and love of God, faith in Him, and understanding of His gospel will ultimately lead to happiness. Sigmund Freud is the father of psychoanalysis. He was as a physiologist, a medical doctor, psychologist, and influential thinker of the early 20th century. Sigmund Freud shared the psychological view of self. He believed in the psychoanalytic theory of self. Freud asserts that the human psyche personality is structured into three parts, tripartite. These structures, the id, ego, and superego, all develop at different stages in a person's life. And these three structures are systems and not physical parts of the brain. And he said that although each part comprises unique features and contributes to an individual's behavior, they interact to form a whole. The next philosopher is David Hume, and he carries this thought that Hume is our politics. They say that Hume is our creed. Hume is our philosophy. Hume is our religion. This was the announcement by 19th century thinker James Hutchison Sterling, mirrors the novel position in the scholarly idea held by Scottish nationalist David Hume. So, so that's how Hume was called by his followers during his time. That he believed that the self is the bundle theory of mind. Hume is skeptical about the existence of the self, specifically on whether there is a simple, unified self that exists over time. For him, man has no clear and intelligible idea of the self. He also said that no single impression of the self exists. Rather, the self is just the thing to which all perceptions of a man is ascribed. More so, he said that even if there was such an impression of the self, it would have remained constant over time to constitute an identity. And that according to Hume, man's impression changes, it varies. He said that even attempts to have impressions of the self must change or must fail for all these attempts. They are really just occasions for one to notice perceptions. And so he simplified the statement that a person can never observe oneself without some other perceptions. So Hume said that what we call the self is really just a bundle or collection of different perceptions. Now, to summarize David Hume's philosophical standpoint, his orientation was, was an empiricist. He advocates a skeptical philosophy that David Hume's described this as all knowledge passes through the senses. Also, he said that separate ideas can be joined in the mind. Also, there is no self, but only a bundle of perceptions. Plato. Plato is one of the world's best known and most broadly read and examined thinkers. He was the understudy of Socrates and the educator of Aristotle. It was actually Plato, as I mentioned, it was Socrates' very prized student who expanded on Socrates' idea of the self. And yes, as we've talked about Plato last time, he promotes the idea that the ideal self is the perfect self. And according to Plato, man was omniscient or all-knowing before he came to be born in this world. And according to Plato, with the separation of from the paradise of truth and knowledge in his long exile on earth, he forgot most of the knowledge he had. And he said that by constant remembering through contemplation and doing good, he can regain his former perfection. And also, according to Plato, he believed that man is now an exile on earth. And he said that man has a guiding star, man has a model or a divine exemplar which he must follow to reach and attain his destiny. So, in other words, this means that man in this life should imitate his former self. More specifically, he should live a life of virtue in which true human perfection exists. And he said that happiness is the fruit of the virtue and can be attained by constant imitation of the divine exemplar of virtue. Now, to summarize his philosophical standpoint, he was an idealist and he advocates dualism and idealism. Again, he said that the moral virtue is rooted in the intellect and leads to happiness. And he said that wisdom and knowledge lead to virtue, which will lead to happiness eventually. John Locke was among the most famous philosophers and political theorists of the 17th century. He is often regarded as the founder of a school of thought known as British empiricism, and he made foundational contributions to modern theories of limited liberal government. And he was also influential in the areas of theology, religious toleration, and educational theory. Now, we talked about John Locke last time that promotes personal identity. He said that the personal identity or the self is a matter of psychological continuity. For him, personal identity is founded on consciousness, on memory, and not on the substance of either the soul or the body. And John Locke said that the personal identity is the concept about oneself that evolves over the course of an individual's life. And he said that it may include all aspects of life that man has no control over. Like, for example, where he grew up, or the color of his skin, as well as the choices he makes, like how he spends his time and what he believes. Next is Rene Descartes, which is frequently credited with being the father of modern philosophy. And this title is defended due both his break with the customary scholastic Aristotelian theory predominant at his opportunity and to his advancement of the new unthinking sciences. So Rene Descartes states that the self is a thinking entity distinct from the body. And his famous principle was cogito ergo sum, which means I think, therefore I am. He said that although the mind and the body are independent from each other and serve their own function, he said that man must use his own mind and thinking abilities to investigate, analyze, experiment, and develop themselves. Now, continuing on, based on your module, there are two philosophers who answer, "Who am I?" And these are Rene Descartes and John Locke. John Locke was an empiricist. He, he, he promotes a philosophy, the theory of personal identity. And John Locke described it as it is in the consciousness alone that identity exists, not in the body and soul. There is a distinction between man and person. And according to John Locke, the soul may change, but consciousness remains intact. Another one is the savant Rene Descartes that proposed that our psyche and considerations are our actual character, and that a personality, he called it a spirit. Rene Descartes is a rationalist and advocates a mind-body dualism. As well, what we've said a while ago, he was known for the principle, I think, therefore I am, that according to him, the mind and soul can exist without the body. And establishing the distinction of soul from the body can make people believe in the afterlife and the soul's immortality.